Welcome to this interactive Screenbook course on HTML. In this introduction, I'm going to explain the role of HTML on the internet and why it is so important. What is HTML? It is the standard markup language for creating web pages and web applications. Along with CSS and JavaScript, it is one of the cornerstones of the World Wide Web. Every website and every web application will render HTML to the browser. Let me explain how the web works in essence. Once you have developed a website, you need to host it on a server to make it accessible to the World Wide Web. The server says, here's my number, call me maybe. That is what we call an IP address. And often we put a domain name over that IP address so that it is easy to remember. When you type that domain name on the browser will then give the server a call, and then the server will send the hosted files back to the browser to be rendered. Your browser will first load the HTML, which may reference other CSS files and JavaScript files, and will load those references in the order that they are listed in the HTML from top to bottom. So CSS and JavaScript is built on top of HTML elements, like skin on bones. Think of HTML as the skeleton. HTML provides tags to name different types of content, or rather elements, on your website. For example, the header element, the links, styles, etc. This helps your browser understands what it reads to render it properly. Even though the browser only needs HTML to render a website, think of it as a skeleton with bare contents that you will then make it dynamic and more beautiful using JavaScript and CSS. You can think of JavaScript as the brains of your website or web application. It can modify the HTML and CSS and re-render elements of the page based on user input or logic or changes in data from a server. This makes your HTML dynamic rather than static. A dynamic website behaves more like this. After the page is rendered, the user can interact with inputs and elements on the page and trigger JavaScript functions, which can modify the HTML elements and contents, the CSS, and send or fetch data to and from the server, which then gets sent back to the browser to be re-rendered. Games and interactive applications can be built upon HTML thanks to JavaScript. However, without rendered HTML elements, JavaScript and CSS will have no visible usefulness on the browser. You can think of CSS like the skin of the website. CSS allows us to enhance the user experience for visitors, design a user interface, implement a brand identity, apply typographic and visual design principles, make the site responsive for mobile and desktop viewing alike, and overall a more enjoyable experience to look at and use. Now, regardless of whether you are looking to be a designer of websites and web applications or a more full stack developer of web applications, a thorough understanding of HTML is a must. And hopefully after this course, you will have HTML in your pocket. In this course, I'll share with you the boilerplate tags and declarations that you'll need on every project. We'll practice element nesting and indentation. We'll learn how to use layout elements semantically or properly, learn how to use metadata, link, scripts, and style elements. We will use attributes, IDs, classes along the way. We'll learn how to embed images, video, and audio. We'll also practice using text formatting elements. We'll learn how to make a numbered or bulleted list of items. And to wrap things up, we'll learn about forms and tables. As a result, we're going to build a project using the most useful elements and best practices of HTML5. I will provide you with CSS and JavaScript to make learning HTML more visually enjoyable and fun. My name is Eric. You can find me as I am Tirado pretty much anywhere on social media. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me anytime or ask questions on the Q&A section on the sidebar, and let's jump right in. For the browser to render a website, it needs HTML. And for us to write HTML, we need an HTML document. And what makes an HTML document? That is having the extension of .html. Over on the top left of our workspace, we have a gear icon. By clicking there, I can select New File, and I'm going to create a new file and simply give it the name of hello.html to be added to my website assets. As you can see, if we try to render this and open the browser, we can see that we still have an error. When you enter a URL in your browser makes a call to the server requesting the website assets. The Screenbook browser is automatically looking for the assets in your project files here on our Files panel. But now it doesn't know what the name of my HTML document is to render it automatically. If I tell the browser exactly what document to look for, it can find it. For example, if I type hello.html, hello world, let's hit save again. And as we can see, it will render hello world. But it could not find this on its own. So how do we get a home page to load by default? All browsers will look for a file called index.html in order to render it as the home page, also known as the landing page. For this reason, every project needs to contain an index.html file that the browser can load by default. Now I'm going to go ahead and rename this to index.html, and I'm going to save it. And now in the browser here, I'm going to type index.html, and it will render hello world. Now the browser will load this by default. If you would like to try this outside of Scrimba on your actual browser, you may use any text editor that comes with your computer and simply save a file and name it index with the extension of .html. Then drag it onto your browser and it will render whatever text you placed inside. There are more advanced and free text editors out there that you can use to edit HTML and other programming languages such as Atom, Visual Studio Code, and Sublime Text, to name a few. To create a JavaScript file, you need to use the extension of .js, and to create a CSS file, we need the extension of CSS. Now, these don't need any specific names since our index.html document can tell the browser the exact names of the required CSS and JavaScripts. We'll learn more about that on another lesson, but for now, let's name them index.js and index.css as well. Index.js, index.css. Now that we have our HTML document, we can begin learning how to code HTML. See you in the next lesson. Hello, welcome to. In this lesson, we're going to be practicing nesting. And I've prepared some CSS so that we can visually understand nesting and how it works. And we're going to begin by connecting that CSS style sheet to our HTML document. So let's go ahead and begin there. Let's make a link, and you do that with the link tag. So you create link, and then we're going to type rel, which stands for relationship. And you're letting the browser know what relationship this style sheet has to HTML document. And that would be style sheet. Let's go ahead now and put the reference to the index.css. Okay, so we have named this CSS style sheet as index.css. It could be named styles.css or anything else. And just make sure it has the same name. Okay, so now let's hit save and see what happens. Ta-da! We have purple background color applied to the body tag. That's why everything turned purple. Let's remove this hello world here. And now we're going to play with nesting. So I'm going to create a div element. This is the most common element that is used on HTML. And this element doesn't have any semantic meaning. It is pretty much for any content that you want to divide from other content that you're not sure if you should use other semantic tags for. And as you can see, I created this div element with an opening tag and a closing tag wrapped by the body opening tag and the body closing tag. So it's a child of the body. Now let's add a class by typing class equals, in quotation marks, I'm going to put white. And now you're going to see that this element has a white background. It has a width and a height. This is because in the CSS, I have applied a style to any element that has the class of white. So think of white or a class as a cell phone number that the CSS can call and then attribute styles to any element that has that class. And similarly, there is an attribute called ID. But the ID, it is not meant to be used on multiple elements. Only on one single element on your whole document should have that specific ID. So it's good for when you're making an element that it's going to be on your website only once, and you can call that, for example, advertisement. And then in the CSS, you can style that. Also, JavaScript uses IDs to communicate with elements. So we're going to leave this as class of white. Okay, I'm going to make another element here, and I'm going to call it div class green. All right, so now we have two elements, and as you can see, they're not inside each other, they're next to each other, and that's because they are siblings. Now, what would happen if I grab this div with the class of green and put it inside the opening and closing tags of the div with the class of white? I'm going to hit save. All right, there we go. Now that green div is visually also inside of the other element. It is wrapped by it. Okay, so I'm going to create proper indentation here so that we can visually understand what's going on. And now you can pause this video, go in here, and create another div inside of the green div that has the class of red. I'll wait. All right, that should look something like this. Ta-da! Perfect. I love it. Let's create more elements here. If you like, feel free to play around however you want with this. These are the only three classes that I have styled, so stick to those three classes there, the white, green, and red, but you can have multiple elements. And you can keep doing the same thing for all of them. It's pretty fun. Feel free to play around with these elements and see you in the next lesson. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and populate this head element with some meta tags. Well, before the meta tags, let's do the title tag. Unfortunately, we cannot preview what the title tag does on this browser because the Scrimba browser doesn't show the title of the page. But just to illustrate it, the title of this lesson is called Head Elements. And you can see that the title of this course is also on the tab of your browser. And that is because your browser is looking for the content of the title tag and placing that on the tab on your browser. So here we can say this HTML document is called Learning HTML. And there are other meta tags that you should add. For example, the meta char set equals UTF-8. So this is telling the browser what character set you are using to write your HTML document with. Okay, and there are other ones. You're going to give it a name of description, and the content of that description is going to be my first HTML website. And as you can see, there's no closing tag for the meta tag, and that is because it is a self-closing tag and never carries content, so it doesn't require a closing tag. Everything is in attributes and values right inside the opening tag itself. There's one meta tag that you must always have on a document, especially if you're going to be building a responsive website, and that is called the viewport meta tag. So here we're going to type name viewport, and on the content, we're going to specify the width of the site is always the device width, comma, and let that initial scale be 100%. What this allows is for your browser to render everything at a 100% scale, no matter what the width of your browser is. So you must always have this tag, especially if you're trying to build a beautiful, responsive website. Okay, here we have the link tag that we brought over from our previous document. It is loaded in the same server as our HTML, but let me tell you that you can also import an external style sheet from anywhere on the web. On our website, we're going to be using icons that come from a style sheet that is hosted on fontawesome.com. Fontawesome.com makes fonts that we can access through HTML classes. I'm just going to import that right in because we're going to be using it on our project. So this goes to show that you can import a style sheet that's loaded on your server, or you can import an external style sheet that it's on the web. Now, you can also have embedded styles in the document. Just know that whatever style is here, you cannot use it on another page because you cannot import it or reference it or link to it from another HTML page. Let's write some content here. This is the header 1 element, which is the most important text on your site. You should only use it once per page just so that the browser know what the most important text is. Here we're going to type hello world. And as you can see, we have some text. Now, we're going to explore the header tags later on. But now I'm going to use the style here to apply some text to our hello world here. So let's do H1. And I'm going to do text align center. There you go. I have aligned the text. Now this style right here will override this index.css because it is after in the flow. The browser will read this and then override it with this. Now you will be able to overwrite this if you do an inline style. And you do that by typing the attribute of style with a value of, let's say, I'm going to do text align left just to show you that I can overwrite it. There you go. In the line to the left, it overwrote what this specified right there. Now I'm going to change the color to, let's say, gold. There you go. So I'm applying text align center here. I'm applying color gold here. And this background purple comes from the index.css. So that's two ways that you can apply styles on your page. Now there's another element that you can use called script so that you can run JavaScript right on your website. And I'm going to run a simple script that says, hello universe. And this is going to give an error. Let's save it. And that is because I don't have anything with the ID of H1 on the document. So let's type ID H1, hit save, and we still have the error. And that is because we need to put script after the element that we're trying to modify with JavaScript. Hello universe. There you go. I replaced the content of hello world with hello universe. Okay, so I'm not trying to give you a lesson on JavaScript, but even if you don't know JavaScript, you can import JavaScript plugins that other people have developed into your site. So you always want to make sure that it's inside the body, but it needs to be after the rest of the content of your site. And now let's say I want this to come from an external JavaScript file. So let's go ahead and cut this out. I'm going to put it inside this JavaScript file. We lost the hello universe. And now for the script tag, I'm going to type source index.js and I'm going to hit save. And there we go. We've imported the same JavaScript code that we had inside the tag from here. And now that we've got our head elements set up, our meta tags, our styles, and script tags, we're ready to start building our layout. Let's go. In this lesson, we're going to be building this beautiful layout using the layout elements that have been provided to us using HTML5. Let me tell you a little bit about how we used to do it before we had these layout elements. We used to use the div element to separate all kinds of different content on our page. And to differentiate one div from another, we would use classes. And you can do this today, but HTML5 has provided us tags for the most commonly used layout elements. So we're going to replace this div with the header element. In here, I'm just going to type header and let's see what that looks like. If you ever want to see what these look like without the styles, just feel free to comment out or remove this style right here. And you'll see header right there. Okay, I'm going to put that back. Another great layout element that we've been given is the footer element. I don't know why I did two closing tags there. See what that looks like. Perfect. All right. I'm going to type footer in here. And another great element that they gave us is the section element. Now, you may want to divide different parts of your site by sections, and you don't have to use divs anymore. You can be a little bit more specific and say this is a different section of the page. That's all it is. Pretty straightforward. In here, I'm going to type the main element. Now, this tells your browser what the main content of this document is. So don't put anything that's repeated throughout different pages in here. Don't put the header in here. Don't put the sidebar in here. Don't put the footer in here. The main is for the specific content of this document. In here, I'm going to write the article element. And in here, I'm going to type article. Let's see what that looks like. All right, there we go. I have an article inside my main element. I'm going to multiply this. All right, perfect. And now, as a sibling of the main element, I'm going to place the aside. What this says is this is content aside of the main content. So sometimes having ads or a sidebar on our page can go inside of the aside element. One last one that I'm going to use here. I'm going to replace this header type here for the nav element. This is also a very common element, and they've given us an element for that. And I'm just going to type here navigation and hit save. All right, here we go. We've built a basic layout using the layout elements of HTML5. On the next lesson, we're going to embed some images and a video. See you there. In this lesson, we're going to play around with the figure and image elements. Let's go ahead and get started with the image element. So here is the image tag, and the image tag does not have a closing tag, such as article. It has a closing tag here and the closing tag for main. It doesn't have that. It is what we call a self-closing element. It does not carry content inside of it. So you're just going to put a / there at the end of the tag. And it has two attributes that are required. And one of those is source, and the other one is alternate, and you type it as such. For the source attribute, the value is simply the name of your image or a link to the image. If the image were to be at the root directory of your files, such as where this index.html is, if it was at the same level, you would type simply the name of the image and the extension. If the image is inside of a folder that is at the root directory of your project, then you would type the folder name / and then the image name. Now, I cannot upload an image here onto Scrimba, but I can link to an external image somewhere else on the internet. So I'm just going to grab a URL and paste it right here. I'm going to hit save. There we go. Now we can see the image. Feel free to play around with this. Grab an image from the internet and try to embed it right there in the source. This alternate attribute, the value that you place here, now for the alt attribute, what you're telling the browser is if you cannot load the image, what alternate information it can show. So here you simply type information about the image, such as a laptop with a mouse on a desk, and a pair of glasses. Now, this can be especially helpful for people that are visiting your site but are visually impaired, and they may be using screen readers to view and maybe using screen readers to navigate your site. And though they cannot see the image, they can get an idea of the image that you're using on your page as an illustration or a graph. So these are the two required attributes of the image tag. Now let's go ahead and move on to the figure tag. So this one does have an opening and a closing tag. So I'm going to go ahead and put them in. I'm going to indent image right here. Perfect. Now the figure element has an element. Now the figure element has a child element that is to be used together with it, and that is called fig caption. That also has an opening and closing tag. And in here, I'm gonna write a caption to the image just to give it a little description. It could be now let's learn about the fig. Now let's learn about the figure element. The figure element specifies self-contained content, not just images. It could be an illustration, it could be code, photos, diagrams, etc. I'm going to write the closing tag here. And what's special about the figure element is that it has a child element that goes along with it called fig caption. And in here, you can write a caption that is directly related to the content inside the figure element. This could be at the top of the figure element or at the bottom as I am placing it here. And here I'm going to describe uh, And here I'm going to describe the figure image. I'm going to hit save. All right, and we can see how the browser will attach this caption right to the bottom of the image as a little description. Alternatively, you can add styles to this and change how it behaves. As an example, I have made a class that we can add here. I have styled this with CSS to the class of hero. I'm going to hit save. There we go. We can see that the caption is on top, the image is blurred. You can play around with figure and editing the content of it. So um, as you can see, CSS completely modified the way the caption looks, and the image itself is now blurred. So don't feel limited by Fig Caption. It is another tool that we can use to style our content more effectively. So as you can see, I have applied quite a bit of So as you can see, I have modified quite a bit the figure image, the figure element. So as you can see, I have modified quite a bit the figure element and the contents of the figure elements, such as the image and the caption. So don't feel like it's going to limit you. It is simply more semantic to use it when you need it, and you are completely free to make it look how you need it to. And you are completely free to make it look just how you need it. Hey guys, in this lesson we're going to learn how to embed a video using HTML. The first way is using the video element. I'm going to type video, and I'm going to treat it as a self-closing element or a void element, just like we did with image, meaning it has no closing tag. In it, I can type source, and for the source, I can type the name of the video. If it was in my root directory, it would be the name of the video. If it was inside a folder, I would type the folder name and then the video name. But because I don't have that, I'm going to go ahead and use an external video source right here. Now, Screama cannot record the video playing, so I'm going to tell you to pause the video here, open the preview, and hit play for yourself. Were you able to? That is because there are no controls. You need to type the attribute of controls so that you can hit play. Go ahead, jump into the code, and now try to play it. All right, I hope you were able to. There are other attributes you can use, such as autoplay, so the video plays by itself. There's one called muted, so that it is muted by default. Loop, so the video plays over and over again by itself. Preload, so the video downloads or buffers before the user hits play. And there's also width. I'm going to give it 600 pixels, and there's also height. I'm going to give it a height of 350 pixels. All right. So there's my video, but now I want my video to be responsive. If you can see the frame of the video, the width does not change based on the width of the viewports. So I have used CSS to create a class for a wrapper. So I'm going to wrap this in a div with the class of responsive vid. And I'm going to hit save. And now you'll see that the boundaries of the video should be responsive. Now, the video element can take the source as a nested element. For that, I'm going to need to create a closing tag for the video element. And the nested element is going to be called source. And in here, I'm going to paste the source attribute that I had before. Now I'm going to use the type attribute, and I'm going to tell the browser this is a video of the format MP4. Now, this is useful or necessary because some browsers do not support formats like OGG, for example, Safari and Internet Explorer. So you need to have a fallback source for those browsers. So this is good practice for video. Make sure that you can upload multiple formats of your video, especially if your website is going to be used by people that may have older browsers. Another way that you can embed a video is using the iframe elements. I'm going to type the iframe opening and closing tags, and the iframe can take a width. Actually, you need to give it a width so that you can see the content, and a height as well. So I'm going to give it 350. And these are pixel dimensions again. And for the source, to help you understand a little bit of what the iframe does, I'm just going to type a URL to the scrimba.com page. So as you can see, it has put the Scrimba page in a frame inside of my document. If this is not working in the recording, go ahead and jump into the preview yourself and try to play with this, but it has put the Scrimba website within my document. Now, this is the method that some platforms will give you a video to be embedded on your site, such as YouTube. If you find a video on YouTube, right below, there's going to be a tab that says Embed. Go ahead and click that, and you can copy the code there, which is an iframe, and paste it. Those are the two ways in which you can embed videos in HTML. See you in the next one. In this lesson, we're going to learn about list items, and we're going to build our navigation bar. So to start off, I'm going to disable the CSS and also this figure element. And in here, I'm going to type UL, a UL element. It has an opening and a closing tag. That's because it's going to contain certain elements, and those elements are LI, which stands for list item. And those have an opening and a closing tag. So UL stands for unordered list. I'm going to type here item 1, hit save. Okay, it's an unordered list, meaning it has no numbers. If you want one with numbers, you do an ordered list with an OL. There we go. It has a number. Perfect. Let's go back to UL. Now, list items behave as block elements, meaning they will stack vertically. They will not go in one line. But you can override that with CSS. I'm going to go ahead and put this style sheet back, and let's see what happened to that UL. There we go. We have it in a row. I'm going to get rid of this text that I don't need anymore. Okay, I'm going to add some anchor tags. And I'm just going to put a pound symbol there. Close the opening tag for the anchor and have another anchor closing tag here. Okay, perfect. So now these are links inside of a list item, and that should add the default link styles. Perfect. I can have this outside of my header for a different style that I've prepared. So these are different ways that you can have an app. You can have it below a header or inside a header. As a matter of fact, you can have it as a sidebar or off canvas. If you notice that all of my content is wrapped by a div that has a class of center, and that is because I have styles for sidebars. I'm just going to go ahead and type those up real quick, as well as a bar to toggle it, triggering some JavaScript functions. Let's take a look. Isn't that neat? Okay. Now I can also copy this unordered list and put it on a sidebar, for example. And let's see what that looks like. Awesome. Beautiful. Okay, so there we go. We have learned how to use lists. Remember, if you want to see what this stuff looks like without styles, just remove the CSS, take a look. All right, there we go. We learned about list items, and how they can be used. We're going to keep building up our page on the next lesson. See you there. All right, in this lesson, we're learning headings, and headings are pretty easy. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to scroll right below my figure elements right here, and I'm going to begin with the most important heading of them all, and that is the H1. I'm going to type that here, and let's hit save and take a look. All right, there we go. This is the most important heading. Now, I'm going to go to the least important heading. They go from 1 through 6, so I'm going to do H6. And I'm going to type a little description here. All right. The browser will render these at different sizes. H1 is the largest and H6 as the smallest. Now, we may be tempted to use H1 through 6 to style our text and make them larger or smaller. But the browser and search engines and screen readers want to know what the most important text of your site is. So use H1 through 6 to determine importance, not the size. So I want to say that learning HTML is the most important. So I'm going to wrap it in the H1, and I'm going to use an H2 for this header here. And I'm going to save it. And now we can see that it got smaller. But now let's say I want to make the H2 of a larger font size without changing it to an H1. Well, that is why we have CSS. So I'm just going to go ahead and put style here and font size. And I'm going to make this 3 EMs. And as we can see, our H2 now is visually larger, but I'm still letting the browser know it is not the most important text of this document. That's pretty much it. Feel free to play with headings H1 through 6, and see you in the next lesson. All right, in this lesson, we're learning about paragraphs and some basic text formatting. In here, it's a little bonus. We have the HR, a horizontal row. It simply draws a line. You can modify that with CSS to look however you'd like, but let's begin with the paragraph tag. So that would be simply a P, and we would have an opening and a closing tag for the P. And in here, you can type anything you'd like. I have some text that talks about HTML, so I'm just going to paste that in here. Let's hit save and see what that looks like. All right, there we go. We got a paragraph. Pretty boring. So let's use some extra markup here to jazz it up a little bit. So here we got hypertext markup language. I'm going to make this bold, and we're going to use the bold element, which is simply a B. And we place the opening tag there, and I'm going to put the closing tag over here after HTML. There we go. Now that's bold. Pretty cool. We got some other ones. We got italics. I'm going to turn cascading style sheets and CSS into italics. So that is simply the I. And let's hit save. And let's take a look. Nice. Okay, cascading style sheets and CSS. It's all in italic. We also have another one called emphasis, which is EM. Let's hit save. And as you can see, it also italicized it, but it is telling the browser that it is not just italicized, but it is more important than other words because it is emphasized. So some of these tags don't only change the style or the way that it looks, but also changes the meaning of the words that are wrapped within them. We also have one called strong, which is another word to add emphasis to text, and it is styled like bold. We also have another one that I think is pretty neat. It's called mark. Pretty much like you grabbed a marker or a highlighter and went over the text. Let's take a look at that. There we go. HTML documents is highlighted. I like that. And inside a paragraph, you can also put a link. So let's say you want to put a link in your text to another page on your website or another page on the internet. You can wrap your text in an anchor tag. Type the href. I'm just going to put a pound symbol so it doesn't go anywhere. And put the closing tag here. All right. HTML describes. There you go. It's a link. Doesn't do anything. Okay, so this is basic formatting for paragraphs. I'm going to show you a little bit more in the next lesson. Welcome to Text Formatting Part 2. Now, let's say that you want to break a paragraph to start on a new line. You may have tried doing this right here, but that doesn't quite work. And let me tell you that there is a tag for that. And that would be the break tag. Let's see how that looks. All right, we see that web browsers is on a new line after World Wide Web. Perfect. Now, I've seen people that will pile these break tags like this to create spaces between different lines of text. That is not good practice. Just go ahead and make a new paragraph like this. And there we go. Those are the two ways in which you can break a new paragraph to a new line. Another useful tag is the block quote tag. If you have a quote on your document and you want it to stand out, And I'm just going to paste a quote that I found on the internet about development, and I'm going to hit save. Let's take a look at that. All right, beautiful. By default, it is usually indented a little bit from the left of where the paragraphs are aligned, but I have styled it so that it looks like this. The block quote tag can also take the attribute of cite, and you can put a citation to the source of this quote. I'm just going to say Twitter, and here we go. Perfect. Awesome. We also have a tag of code, which is just letting the browser know that you're putting code inside of this element. And I'm going to paste some CSS in here just to see what it looks like. All right, and what it did is it put it all in a single line. But the browser by default will apply what is called a monospace typeface. But what if we want to keep our indentation? For that, we have another tag called pre. Now, this code element doesn't really do much for me. I don't really need it. I'm going to replace it for the pre tag, and let's see what that does. Scroll down. All right, so pre stands for pre-formatting. So all the indentation that I gave my code stayed there. Now, I don't want all of this indentation that I used to keep my code pretty. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to get rid of all this indentation. And let's take a look at it again. Right, perfect, beautiful, there we go. And that is how you use the code and the pre tag and the block quote. I'm going to teach you one more tag called the quote tag. And for that, I'm just going to replace this mark tag for a Q. This is for a short quote. I'm going to save. As you may have noticed, I did not add these quotation marks, but the browser will add those quotation marks by default. All right, I hope you had fun learning these extra formatting elements, and see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to cover the basics of tables. Tables can be a bit complicated for some people. It was for me at the beginning, but I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. Let's get started. When creating a table, the first element that we need to create is the table element. And the table element can take a child element of tr, which stands for table row. And the table row element can take a child that is called the TD, or table data element. And in here is where we would put our content. So I'm just going to type here table data. I'm going to duplicate this 3 times. Let's take a look at that. And we have table data 3 times in a single row. Now I'm going to apply a class so that it takes on a CSS style that I've provided. And let's see what that looks like. All right, here we go. We got our table with 3 table data elements in a single row. Now I'm going to duplicate the table row 3 times. Let's take a look at that. We have 3 rows, and each row has 3 TD elements. Now I'm going to duplicate this row one more time. I'm going to place it above here. And there is another element that the table row can nest, and that is the TH, which stands for table header. I'm going to replace this with header, and let's see what that looks like. Even though the browser applies some styling by default, this styling right here comes from CSS. Now, the table header element, as well as the table data element, can take an attribute that is called col_span. In other words, span this number of columns. So because I have 3 table data elements creating 3 columns on each row, and I want one of these to span across all 3 columns, all the way at the top. And I'm just going to call this spanning 3 columns. And let's take a look at that. All right, here we go. We got our table header spanning 3 columns. Similar to that, we have another attribute called row span, and I'm going to apply it here. And now this is going to make this table data element span across rows. So if I wanted to span through 1, 2, 3 rows, I'm going to specify 3. And now let's see what happens. Oh, it spanned 3 rows, but now it pushed 2 items out of the 3 columns. And that is because that row span has taken a spot on this 3rd row as well as on this 4th row. So that is as if we had 4 columns on the last 2 rows. And that is precisely what we're seeing here. On the last 2 rows, we're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4 columns and 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. So we need to remove table elements from those other 2 columns for them to line up. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to use some of the more advanced elements for tables. There are 3 other elements. There are 3 other elements in tables that allows you to group certain. So we have group table data under table rows, and we have all of the table rows under our table element. Now there are 3 other elements that we can use to categorize the rows. That is t-head, t-body, and t-foot. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab this row and move it into my head. And I'm going to move my content here to the t-body. So now it should look about the same, but what this allows me is to control all of the elements that are inside the t-head separate from the elements that are in the t-body, etc. Now I'm going to show you another element that is called col group. It stands for column group, and you type it as such. Col group opening and closing tag. The col group tag specifies a group of 1 or more columns in a table so that we can format it. And it is useful so that we can apply styles to entire columns instead of repeating the styles for each cell in each row. All right, now we can nest an element called col so that we can apply a style to that whole column. And I'm going to choose background color. Let's do the blue violet color that we're using on our site, and let's see what that looks like. Okay, there we go. And the style that we applied has been applied to every single cell in that column. Now what would happen if I copy this over, and let's change the color here. Okay, so now we have another column. Now what if we switch them around in order here? It will also switch around which column has which color. And another attribute that we can place here is the span attribute. And now I'm going to tell it span across 2 columns. And now we're going to see that the yellow spans across 2 colors. Again, I'm going to switch these around. And there we go. Now this is purple here, yellow here. Actually, this should be up right inside the entire table. And if I remove this style here, we can see that it affects all of the rows. But because I have this style, styling the header, it overwrites the default style there of the col group. All right, and now that we've learned tables, I'm going to have a little challenge. In this challenge, I want you to make a section element inside of the footer. Inside the section element, I want you to create a table with the class of styled. And inside that table, I want you to create 3 rows. On the first row, we're going to have a table header cell with a col span of 2, and you're going to write work hours in there. And for the last 2 rows, you're going to have a table data cell with the following content inside of it. We're going to be using these elements in the next lesson. You should be able to do them. Either way, I'll see you in the next lesson. All right, so now we're going to add some final touches to make our site look more real, make it come alive a little bit. Let's begin by changing our navigation. As you can see, it says item 1 3 times. That's not very realistic, Eric. Why did you do that? Let's go ahead and change these to top. I'm going to do quote, and I'm going to do contact us. I'm going to add a 4th one that is called next page. Now, the pound symbol in the reference stands for an ID. So this is trying to reference a blank ID that does not exist. Now, how about we create links to actual IDs on our page? On the main element here, I'm going to add the ID of top. Now, I'm going to go looking for a block quote and add the ID of quote. And for the form that we have on the bottom of our page, I'm going to add the ID of contact. So now that we have these IDs, I'm going to type them in the values for each one of these links. So the ID of top, the ID of quote, the ID of contact, and let's try these out. So I'm going to hit save. Top. Okay, I'm at the top already. Let's hit quote. It tried to place the contact form as close as possible to the top. Perfect. Now, what about this next page? You may have noticed that I have a document called next.html here on this page. I am simply going to reference the name of the file, which is next.html. And that is because it is at the same level in the files directory as my index.html. Now, let's say there was a folder here on the left that said pages and the next.html document was inside the pages folder. I would have to put the folder name here first and then the document name. But we can leave it like this since next is at the root there. I'm going to hit save. Let's try that out. Awesome. Next.html. We have linked to a separate document in the same directory. So we can see it has different content and different colors because that document has different IDs and classes, and I was able to apply different styles. Awesome. Let's go back to the home page and let's try the sidebar here. This sidebar does not yet work, so let's go ahead and fix that. So now I'm just going to copy this UL over to my off canvas sidebar, fix the indentation. Now let's try this out. Top, quote, contact us, back to top. Perfect. Next page. Sweet. Now we're done. Awesome. I'm so glad you made it this far. You can pat yourself on the back because now you know HTML. Remember that if you have any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A section on Scrimba. You can also interact with the code, and I hope that with your HTML skills, you can take them to the next level, take over the world, and see you in the next course.